Hi, and it's Roger here with a very, very special guest, Seth Godin. Hi, Seth.
How are you? It's good to see
Very
you.
well, very, very well. And we have a really super exciting topic here, which is actually linking directly in with something you wrote way back in, I think it was 2012, which was your education manifesto, Stop Stealing Dreams, What is School For? And we're going to have a conversation where I'm going to have a chance to share with Seth some of his views, not just on why he wrote that, but what actually has happened since and what we can do about it. And at the same time, like looking at the future, reimagining education, what could things look like? So I'd love to start, Seth, with just your take, given that I know a lot of people who are watching this would have already read that manifesto, and it's been almost a decade since then, your take of what's changed, what stayed the same over the last 10 years, especially with the pandemic and everything that we've seen come our way in the last 12 months.
Yeah, so many things to talk about. First, for anybody who's tuning in who's been dislocated or dealt with health or other issues, it's been a slog, and know that you are seen and our heart goes out to you. Let's start with this, the pandemic, because it surfaced the lie of the educational industrial complex in that you need butts and seats to make sure you're where you're supposed to be, doing your homework, and someone's monitoring you. Because all of a sudden we said, oh, but now you need to do it from home. And we moved some of the things to Zoom. And on the other hand, people learned a lot of stuff on their own, that they began to understand that learning and education aren't the same thing. That I have a friend whose 4-year-old was somehow supposed to do Zoom preschool at home, which is absurd, right? Because that's just about compliance. And then, colleges were happy to charge full price when people were doing it remotely. And then people are like, well, I'm not sure I want to go back. And now they have to explain, oh, it's better here. All of which is a mess. And since I wrote Stop Stealing Dreams, and you can watch the 18-minute TED Talk for free, and the book's free too, what I've seen is many of the problems have gotten worse. Student debt has gotten much worse. The focus on credentials and test scores has gotten worse. The whole college SAT cheating scandal just showed up, right? But at the same time, what we are seeing is that human beings, parents and kids, are saying, wait a minute, if this is really about learning, why do I need the test and the seat and the rest of it? Why can't I just learn something? And so they've leaned into enrollment, leaned into the idea of, if I want to learn it, I have every bit of access I need to learn it. It's up to me to go learn something now.
This this whole almost urgency that has come about with the pandemic, and I think 100% everyone around the world in every country has seen just what is wrong with the current system. It's actually coincided in some way with this new rise of like edtech companies like Coursera that just had its public listing, and in China and India there's a lot of them as well that are looking for an alternative. And I know that in your manifesto, you are really saying, look, the online side on its own is not the solution, right? There's got to be something which actually links and mixes the high tech, high touch together with the right mentors. Could you speak to that to a bit? Do you still feel the same way? Do you feel that there are different models out there that actually you've seen that do work really well?
Okay, so online education is not the same as online learning. And simply moving the educational industrial complex online will get you better numbers at first. The same way, moving mail from mail to email. Oh, but we typed it just like it was a letter. We don't do that anymore. In the case of learning, there are so many ways. I mean, more people have learned coding because of Git and GitHub than have learned it from some video course, because the video course may give you a certificate, but it's just talking at you. And, I started a company 5.5 years ago called Akimbo. I don't own it or run it anymore. But the idea there is we learn together. We learn by doing projects, not by watching videos. So I believe the future, as you said correctly, is hybrid. But the hybrid part is, where's my community? Where is the social pressure that's going to push me to do the uncomfortable work of learning? Because learning isn't easy. If it was, you would have learned it already. And so we create structures that push people forward I'm just arguing that the structure of will this be on the test is a fraud. It is not about learning. It's about control.
Right. I mean, this is one of the strangest things. It's actually like right at the very front of your ebook, which is where you say everyone wants to change education, but no one wants to do anything about it. There's this whole craziness around the education system, which I think everyone who's been saying, we need to change it, have found really tough, which is the whole certification process. Like if you want to start an Uber, you can start it and then ask for forgiveness later. But if you want to start a school or university, you just can't do that in most countries. Are you hopeful for the future? Do you think that's going to change, or do you think that's always going to be one of the biggest challenges?
Well, you can start a school, you just can't accredit it and offer a prize. Right? That there's countless schools everywhere on the internet and informal schools in small villages in India and everywhere in between. The thing about accreditation is it is based on scarcity. If everybody was allowed to practice medicine, having a medical degree would be worthless. The medical degree exists because only some people have it. And we're not going to fix this problem by offering accreditation far and wide and up and down, because people will still flock to a different kind of education accreditation that's scarce. So I think the shift needs to be, if you really need a piece of paper, you're going to have to pay somebody a lot. So the example is MIT. MIT, one of the great institutions in the world. You can take every single course at MIT for free, except you can't get a degree when you're done.
Right.
So if you want the degree, that costs $250,000. If you want the learning, it's free. And figuring out the hybrid in between those, that's the work that people like you and others are doing. It's not obvious how culturally we will get there. But I know, as someone who's hired hundreds of people in my career, the only time I've ever looked for a accreditation is as a filter, but I don't hire people based on that. We hire people based on, can they solve my problem?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the biggest challenge we had at Green School in Bali, we had no problem getting parents to come with their kids when the kids were 6, 7, 8 years old. It was when the kids were turning 12, 13, 14, and suddenly it's like, wait, hang on, are they going to get into high school, right? Like what can we do in the high school diploma? And because we were so new with what we were developing, and it wasn't part of the Cambridge system or the K-12 system or the IB system, there was a lot of parents at that point who then worried about, I'm going to be progressive, but then not too progressive. So what role do you, especially with lifelong learning today, where we all have to keep educating ourselves, what would you say to all of those who have kids here should be a different way they could be thinking about being courageous about their children's education?
Yeah. So I know I'm talking to people around the world, but in the US, people put stickers on the back of their car. And the sticker says what school your kid goes to. Now, what is that sticker for exactly? It's about status. It's about, I'm a good parent. It's about, I'm a better parent than you. My heart broke 2 days ago. They had a parade in town to celebrate the high school seniors graduating after a very hard year. And as everyone's driving around and honking, this convertible passed me, and it had 5 of the popular kids in the convertible. And written on the side in erasable marker were the names of the famous colleges they'd all gotten into. And this parent felt successful because they were all overpriced, scarce, not focused on learning institutions, that 2 of them had good football teams that had nothing to do with being a good parent. And so what we need is a sticker replacement strategy. And I'm counting on people like you to help with that. The sticker replacement strategy is, how do we have a sticker that says, well, my kid has raised thousands of dollars for nonprofits, has edited Wikipedia, has a blog with people who are following it, has written 2 Kindle books that have gotten great reviews, and regularly helps people at the hospice. If we could put all that on a sticker, I'm going to pick that kid over the kid who went to Bowdoin anytime. Right.
Yeah. This whole element about where the win is in education is so fascinating because, as you say, like if it's a status symbol, then straight away the majority lose. But there's the other whole part, which is even if someone's just going for a high school diploma, or frankly wanting to start a business, right, as an adult, almost always that whole aspect of learning and the design of the learning experience becomes key. One of the things I love in your manifesto is you talk at one point about passion, but actually how passion is the opposite to fear. And so if you don't break it down and have easy wins where someone actually gets passionate very quickly because they actually have a learning moment in the very beginning of that journey and start winning all the way through, as opposed to fearing the exam, that shifts everything. And one of the speakers that we have in the summit is Salman Khan. And what he figured out very early on with Khan Academy is, if I can gamify this, then we're going to have all sorts of people do it without being forced to do it and want to learn. So I'd love for you to give your take on how the gaming industry and gamification in general over the last 10 years has really evolved massively, as we've seen, going to 3 dimensions now, augmented reality, all those kind of things. What you see that part playing within the whole mindset of how education can transform the future?
Yeah, first of all, so many great ideas in this question, and my regards to Sal. What a hero. They're going to build statues for him years from now. His riff about homework during the day, lectures at night, is a game changer. Totally changed my life. So to decode it, I hope I'm not stealing his thunder here, but it doesn't make any sense to hand make lectures in a real place every day with hundreds of thousands of teachers. Let's find the one best lecture on Pythagorean theorem and have everybody watch the one best one at night, and then come in the morning with their questions and do the homework together, which creates peer pressure, which is a form of a game, to get ever better at it. And I have a thing on my podcast tomorrow about how we should teach math. Most of math for the first 10 years we teach it to kids is about obedience and memorization. It doesn't teach math. It teaches arithmetic.
Right.
I think we should teach kids how to play poker, because if you played poker for 10 years, first of all, it's a level playing field. It's not about being the tallest or the fastest. Number 2, you would learn probability. You would learn to understand decision-making. You would understand game theory. You would understand how people tell the truth and how they, on and on and on. And you would learn almost everything the typical human needs to know about math. And then if you're eager and ready, you should go learn calculus and the rest, right? So back to your point about games, I was a game designer before I was an author, and I love game design. There's 2 kinds of game design. There is the game design for the large but not dominant number of people who want ever deeper, more emotional, rich interaction, and that's the bulk of the industry. But then there's also the games we all play every day, and not just things like Scrabble, but I mean all our interactions with systems at some level are a game. If you're at the supermarket and there are 4 lines and you're trying to guess which line to get on, that's a game, right? And human beings are born playing games. So what we have is a brute force stupid game, which is, what's your GPA? That's the only game. That's a dumb game. We need to layer on all sorts of more, vaguer, more subtle games. Like, in this study group of 7 people, all of us know that you're the one who keeps asking the good questions. You won that round. We don't have to give it a number, but we have to think as developers, as educators, when we're looking at our pedagogy, how does someone win today? How do they have an interaction that isn't about, phew, class is over, but instead I was enrolled and it worked.
Right.
That's what's on offer.
Yeah. Yeah. The most fascinating thing in choosing that game, which I find really interesting, because someone can have a game which is I got to learn how to get a job, and then you find out that's not a good game because the job's not there, or versus how do I create a job, which obviously is a very, very different game, or how do I go out and make money, which is a very different game from how do I be of service. So the defining of the game itself from the teacher's role is so important. There's one thing I love, because I'm actually I have on my big screen here, I have your manifesto open, and I'm going to cherry pick a few different items that kind of take this journey forward and what's changed over the last 10 years. You have, and just so everyone who hasn't actually read the manifesto yet, what's so great and what I love is that you've just broken it down into these snippets of over 100 different points, which read just like your blogs, which is awesome. You have one here, the wishing and dreaming problem, which I love because you're linking wishing to dreaming and the whole thing about stealing dreams. And you actually started, if you had a wish, what would it be? If a genie arrived and granted you a wish, would it be a worthwhile one? And of course, everyone who's in our community and the people that are joining here, they're joining via the platform Genius U. And that whole idea that look, if we all had a genie in the pocket that was given, who's actually knew who we were and was able to say, hey, here's who you connect with. Here's the next thing maybe you should be looking at to learn. Here's what you might be interested in. That whole aspect of having that personalized mentor, AI is giving us opportunities now, if it's used in the right way, to empower us in ways that we don't have to be the computer anymore and calculate and memorize, but actually to make us better at being self-aware as well. That whole aspect of the dreaming problem, do you think, given the power of the media and what it's done in the last decade, we are having to catch up more now and people even remembering how to dream or how to believe? Or do you believe that the likes of people like Elon Musk and Salman Khan and visionaries, that there are more people who have a head start in knowing that they're actually allowed to dream right now?
So when I was a teenager, the thing to say was, there's nothing on. I'm bored. There's nothing on television. And pretty much there wasn't, because there was only 3 channels. And now kids still say, I'm bored. There's nothing on. And there's infinity channels. And there's more Wikipedia entries that they could ever read, et cetera, et cetera. What they're really saying is, I don't know what game to play. I am not engaged. I am not enrolled. I have been brainwashed and indoctrinated into giving up. And part of the thing when we look at business heroes is most business heroes are basically saying, you should bow down to me because I'm smarter than you. They are not empowering people to actually go forward. So I would never put Elon and Sal into the same category, because they're totally approaching it different ways. To find a dream is to find a game that you think you can play. And maybe you will win the game, but playing the game is the point of the dream. And the problem with almost all education is it trades money for stamping out your dream. You give the money, you get the certificate, and maybe at the end you get to be a doctor or you get to be an engineer, but the game you're playing doesn't seem to be related to the thing you want. It seems to be this detour that you have no desire to go down. And I think the magic of enrollment is it's a self-fulfilling bit of magic. If you decide, for example, that you want to be an entrepreneur, you can be an entrepreneur in the next 6 minutes. You can start selling things from your garage on eBay. You can discover how to play that game ever better. It doesn't cost anything at all. And once you get better at that, oh, I'm figuring out those kinds of people like this kind of story. Oh, I'm getting better at this game. And so now being an entrepreneur continues. There's no giant leap at some point where you're proof that you have the paper and now you can go do the thing. We learn by doing, not by testing.
That was really interesting. That point you made, that Elon Musk is in a totally different category from Salman Khan. From the point of view of either from the point of view of mythologizing or putting on a pedestal certain people to make it almost, well, you can't be like that person, or for them to even position themselves that way. Or even going back to Renaissance times, where yes, there were the Michelangelos of the world that you say, well, that person's genius, I can't be like that. But then there were the actual studios in Florence that you could actually go to and give it a go, and even the way they even created masterpieces were by having multiple people involved in it. Do you see that choice as far as teachers go? Because we see YouTubers making millions compared to teachers that might be far more valuable, but not having those leverage mechanisms, not knowing how to use them yet. Do you see that pathway is one that we can consciously make as an educator? Because we have so many educators on here as well, that you don't have to sell your soul and actually put yourself on pedestal or overbrand yourself by actually going out there and doing something which is going to make a lasting difference through the people that you're working with.
Right. So the person who invented Scrabble doesn't make any more money from Scrabble. But if you could build a Scrabble league where people paid money to be in the league, you can make a fortune with your Scrabble league. And the teacher of the future, I think, is not necessarily someone who's cashing out by making video on YouTube. There's always going to be someone flashier or more invested in teaching whatever lesson.
Right.
The future is, did you build a league? Did you build a system? Did you build an organization? Did you build a community where people can play the game of learning? Because it's really hard to do it all by yourself. We know this. But if you can say, there are 42 people here. I am assigning them which videos to watch. I am keeping track. I am asserting and dispensing status points. At the end of it, I'm giving people an entire dossier that they can prove to others they have something far more valuable than a degree. I think that's wide open. I don't think that's going to slow down at all.
That's almost totally changing the view of the teacher, not as the provider of the content, but more the curator, or more like the experience. And this whole idea of just how we are seeing the teaching experience go from one where, okay, I'm going to have to go and be a teaching teacher by getting all the degrees and showing that I can, even get a PhD and call myself a professor, versus being a leading learner, which is like, hey, look what I learned yesterday, or hey, look what you learned yesterday. And that whole aspect of having to learn how to learn again, even as a teacher. Yes. I mean, you do that so amazingly because you're constantly coming up with your new viewpoints, and it's always current. And what it's going to be next year, who knows? It depends where the world goes. But that whole aspect of having to constantly recreate yourself as a teacher to be relevant to your students in itself is such a powerful idea. How do you see the likes of technology being potentially a hindrance to that, but also being something that could really help that?
Yeah, you're bringing up such great points. I used to go to the high school band concerts when my kids were younger. And there were 3 years in a row where they would bring out this young woman to play the piano because she was really, really good at playing the piano. 2 of the years, she didn't even go to the school. She had moved, and the band director was just so entranced with her, he brought her out. And there are no pianos in a band, just saying. The point is, we weren't there to hear great music. And giving this woman more status because she happened to be talented and skilled at the piano was a waste. Because the hard work is, how do you persuade a kid whose parents have pushed them to play the clarinet to love the clarinet? You don't do that by teaching them more songs. You do that by teaching them to hear a beautiful sound and then to experience the thrill of making a beautiful sound. That's pedagogy, that's empathy, and that's enrollment. And it's going to be a long time before we have an AI or a video that knows how to do that. It's going to be about a human being who is doing this work despite the curriculum, not because someone handed them the curriculum. And the magic of pedagogy is that different people learn differently. And so a human has to show up, look people in the eye and say, I see you, and this might unlock what you've got. And if you want to listen to great piano, here, I got it on CD, Keith Jarrett. It's going to be around forever. But if you want to be alive, let's teach you how to be enrolled.
Yeah, this aspect of getting people enrolled, getting students enrolled, having students for life, where people have a passion for learning all through their life, so they're keeping up to date. I want to come to another of these key points that you made here, and I love this one here, defining the role of a teacher, where you say here. I think the way you phrase it, I love, education is the question, teachers are the answer. And there's an element, we're just talking about this in terms of like the experience of the teacher, but there's something very interesting that I've seen happen in some models where, as you say, if you have someone who's really great at being able to share something and they can do the video, watching on YouTube is not the same as having someone guide you through it, right? And having someone who's in your language actually being able to turn it into something which actually is personalized to you based on your learning styles. This is almost like back to the whole thing about it takes a village. You could have some people who are mentors, some people who are guides, some people. It's not just one teacher that has to figure out everything in the way they are. And obviously, there's not just different learning styles; there's different teaching styles as well. So this whole aspect of and you have so many great stories here. Have you spotted some really great models or people doing amazing things outside of some we've already mentioned, where they've actually found ways to bring different groups together into the learning environment?
Well, so my cousin is a high school principal in New York City, and she's off the charts. They've asked her to be a superintendent. She's really good. And I've gone to her school a bunch of times, given talks and things. And it's really easy to see a New York City school, most schools, as a sort of prison, that the kids arrive droopy, that the halls are grimy, that it's noisy, and you get the idea. And then every once in a while, you'll walk into a classroom and you'll feel like everything's different. Because in that classroom, people are engaged with each other, not just giving their attention in this one-way direction to the teacher. And that, if you can do that in New York City classroom, you can do that just about anywhere. That what we have the opportunity to do, whether we're running a Girl Scout troop or teaching after-school literacy, the hard part, teachers have been missing for so long because the system won't let them do the hard part. The hard part is enrollment. If you get enrollment, put them in front of a laptop. They'll get the answers, but you've got to get them enrolled. You're not allowed to blame the parents. You're not allowed to blame the kid. In this moment, you have a chance. You have a chance to figure out how to cast a line. And it's probably not just you. It's the system. It's the peers that, we know that great soccer players are much more likely to come from Brazil than Kansas. Why is that? There's soccer balls in Kansas. It's because if you are born in a favela, you are surrounded by peer pressure from the time you can walk. That's what everyone's doing. People like us do things like this. We're playing soccer. And so there's more soccer players because it's not that they have a better teacher. It's that there's a community where enrollment is more likely to occur. And one of the stories that I've told on stage, I don't have it here in front of me. Do you know the drinking bird? It's a glass thing that dips like this, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there with 5 kids, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, 5 kids. And they're all good students. And I set up the thing and I've got the bird dipping back and forth like this. And I say, how's it work? And they say, it dips back and forth. I said, no, that's what it does. But how does it work? And less than 15 seconds go by. And they say, we don't know, tell us. And they take out pens and papers to write down the answer. I burst into tears. This is the problem. The problem is not only didn't anyone care actually how it worked, we hadn't bothered to enroll them in the journey of being curious. And I said, I'll answer your questions for 20 minutes. Any questions you want. I'll answer them about the specifics. What material is this made out of? What's happening after this? And you can figure out how the bird works. But if you're not able to find that curiosity in a world that's changing as fast as this world is changing, you're doomed. Because we're never going to be able to give you the manual because we're going to have a new version before the manual is even printed.
Right. It's so interesting how the stereotypical picture of a teacher is so different in the West than often in the East, right? Like in the West, it's definitely the sage on the stage. It's like, okay, so this person's going to give me the answers. Even if I want to ask a question, I'm going to have to ask permission by putting my hand up, right? Whereas in the East, it's like the Buddha under the tree. He's not going to volunteer anything. It's like he's just going to wait for your question. And it's amazing if you're an entrepreneur, you start a business, which is what a lot of our community is. They go out to the market after they've finished at school, or even if they've gone and done their MBA, and they're waiting for the answers and no one's giving them answers. And it's only when they actually go out there with the questions, they actually start getting answers and they realize, holy cow, this is a very honest market, but the challenge is my own self-awareness of who I am and what I'm sharing. One of the stories which I love is Sugata Mitra's story on, he's done a number of TED Talks like yourself, and his experiment with the Hole in the Wall project in India, where he started with the question, why aren't the teachers where they're needed, right? And then he realized that's the wrong question because there's a big reason why they're not where they're needed. The bigger question is, can kids learn without the teachers, right? Is there a way for them to evolve and grow? And I just love that whole story about how by just leaving the touchscreen computers in the wall and then realizing that gets you so far, but those 3 components that he figured out is what really gets them learning, which is number 1, having a challenging question or something which is exciting enough to stir curiosity. And then secondly, having a peer that can guide it because they're just naturally stepping into that coach role. And then thirdly, the surprising realization that even that's not strong enough on its own unless you have constant reinforcement from a senior figure. And he realized that, actually, it doesn't have to be a teacher. It could be a granny. Like, in fact, that's the best energy, which is like, what else did you learn? And what else was there without even having any answers? And then he created the whole granny cloud where grannies in the US and UK could actually connect up with the classrooms in India. I just think that that process of iteration to even get to that is what the future of learning is really all about.
Yeah, that's brilliant and well said. To continue the East-West dichotomy, however, ironically, in the East, generalizing here, there's in the education system even more of a compliance override, all the way back to, Zen teachers with sticks, but going on to the big tests that you have to take in China to get to the next level. And so the idea that there's a Buddha under the tree, but also compliance makes it really challenging for the entrepreneur. Whereas in the US, yes, it's been the opposite of that in terms of lecture. But then if you are brave enough to say, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, the compliance rules go out the window and you become a hero because you're not complying. And so part of what goes with my rant about Stop Stealing Dreams is, in addition to brainwashing and indoctrinating kids on the compliance mindset, we've also created this mindset that says, if it's not on the test, don't worry about it and don't get in trouble. And what you pointed out with entrepreneurs asking questions is, if you end up in a good VC's office, all she's going to ask you is, do you understand the genre? Do you understand the people you're serving? What questions don't they even know to ask? And that's why there's such a gulf, because we spent years training people to work on the assembly line at Ford Motor Company, but then we reward the people who didn't do well at that training.
That's such an interesting point. It's very true. Like this whole dichotomy of creativity with the certified structure, and then also the idea of more spiritual view, but then maybe that comes with compliance, which actually kills some creativity. Like, for sure this happens. You can see there's pluses and minuses on both sides, and there is this interesting thing now that we're all global citizens of how we link the best of both worlds together. I think this is where the question is still out over this next decade. I think there's some people who are very optimistic and say, hey, there's enough going on in terms of people accepting the fact that there needs to be new ways, not just parents, but actually companies as well. Companies who say, we're not getting the leaders we need. So we'll sponsor some programs, and some, companies have gone down that route to try and work that out. And a lot of school boards. Really interesting to hear about your cousin. And I'd love to hear a bit more about how she sees the government, and what in the US Biden's doing by adding more funding into what already is a big government-driven pool. But overall, just the fact that you've actually got people who are very optimistic, and then many who actually feel like we're doomed. Like, at one point, I think at the time when you wrote your manifesto, we were just hitting $1 trillion in student debt in the US. It's just gone over 1.6 trillion. I mean, it's just phenomenal. It's ridiculous. There's 42 million students in America that are saddled with some kind of debt. Where do you sit in that spectrum between the optimist that things really can change for the future versus more the pessimist, which is this is going to take a lot longer?
Well, it's already changing. And as usual, it is changing in surprising places with surprising people. It is not changing because Harvard is changing it, because they're not, nor is MIT changing it enough. It's changing because people like you are showing up, people like me, people like Sal, people who are saying, here's the system, we'll just build a new one over here, and sometime people will catch up. And that, combined with a shift in how our economy functions and which jobs people are going to actually get, what a good job is, it's going to mean a few things. First of all, there's a huge swath of colleges in the middle. They're expensive but not famous, that are going to go out of business, because expensive and not famous is a bad combination. And there's going to be this basic level of education that's going to be cheaper and cheaper, that's going to suffice for most jobs. And then there's going to be the famous colleges that are going to persist for a while because they have enough money in the bank that they can outlast all of us, right? But when we think about the next cycles as they're going to come along for our kids, is you're just not going to raise a happy, successful kid who works in a steel mill, because everything that's done in a steel mill is going to get done by a robot. And if we're going to bet on work going forward, the work is going to have to be work where you can't write down what you need me to do all day. Because if you can write it down, I can get someone cheaper than you to do it, right? That, it doesn't matter what happens to the minimum wage in the United States. If you've got a remote customer service center, the phone's going to get answered by someone cheaper than that. And so it's got to be something more important, more variable, more unpredictable than that, because this one of the things that happened to me the last time I was in a hotel a year and a half ago. I get up early. It's 5:30 in the morning. I want to know if the gym's open. So I dial operator and someone answers. And I said, is the gym open? And I hear this typing and I realize the person I'm talking to isn't in the same city as me. They've never been to this hotel. And so they're just typing and then they read to me the answer to what they see on the site. I said to this person, I hope that you have new plans because you're only one step away from voice recognition, voice text to speech. They don't need you anymore, right? And that's going to happen to any kind of job like that.
Mm. The very, very basic premise of your manifesto actually really starts with what a school's for, and you do talk about how the existing system obviously is built for obedience, for compliance, and so on. And that bigger question of what a school for, or what do we as humans do with this world that we're moving into. I had this conversation with it's a few years back, and it was when some of the riots were going on in the US. And it was with one of my American friends who says, hey, this is what you can expect with what's going on with the wealth divide and everything else, with the technological unemployment, that you're going to have people rioting on the streets. And there was this whole view, which was we're all going towards doom. And at the same time, I was living in Bali, where I was seeing people show up and find cheaper and cheaper ways to be living, right? Where they realize, okay, like if I don't have a job, do I need a job? Or can I create some vocation or something that can get me by? And what happened is people realized that for a lot less money than they thought they needed, they could get by. And then what did they do with the rest of the time? They didn't go rioting on the streets. They put that time to something which was much more meaningful. Some of them went help with the kids at school and actually became part-time teachers. Some learned a musical instrument. Some started a business. But this whole distinction between work, right, or education for work versus education for life's work, like what is your work or what is your life's work? And of course, knowing your life's work, not easy unless you really think deeply for a long period of time and get very involved in reflection and self-awareness. But I'm seeing more and more, especially in adult education, that's what people are having to unlearn and relearn. It's not the skill sets, it's about the actual self-awareness of who you are and what makes you different from other people and so on. We actually talk about three things: self-awareness, self-mastery, and self-expression, right? And business is just another way of self-expression, as is teaching. What's your view as to the key role in that more introspective part of education versus the parents will work it out, or religion or something else will work it out, versus the teacher working it out?
Yeah. The protests in my country are the result of hundreds of years of indoctrination and racial injustice. And I can't easily conflate them with things like basic income inequality. I think that it was a long overdue awakening by a lot of people. And you're correct that as we decouple being in a building from doing your work, many of the reasons for people to be in an expensive city start to go away. I'm not sure that that's going to change the tide that has been going on for 100 years toward expensive cities, but some of the practical reasons are going away. With all of that said, a lot of the discontent is going to come partly from the income inequality that is getting worse and worse, but partly from people waking up to being brainwashed and indoctrinated. They're saying, oh, for 20 years, you told me if I did this, I would get a good job for life. And now you're telling me I did everything I was supposed to. And sorry, that's the local fire department. And now you're telling me it's gone and I can't have anything. And those people are understandably upset. And the people who are watching this call are self-aware enough and privileged enough to be able to say, I'm going to go fix this. And I'm going to go engage in a different kind of teaching and learning and self-education and changing things. But the vast majority of people aren't on this call. And so part of what we need to do is tell the others that it didn't take very long for Facebook and Twitter to colonize the day of a lot of people. The typical person in my country spending 2 or 3 hours a day in social media, up from 0, right? That's huge. Well, how do we make a shift like that happen playing a different game? The game of possibility, the game of connection, the game of improvement, because that game's more fun and pays bigger dividends than trolling people online.
Yeah. And as you say, like every country's got its ingrained, embedded cultural rifts as well, and the challenges that come with that. And so that whole aspect of even thinking globally to be able to get perspective in your own situation is super tough to do unless you're actually in a global classroom, right? Which is all part of this too. And I think that this is, this kind of links to, I'm just going to bring to one more that you actually have like closer to the end of your manifesto, where you talk about whose dream. And this is in the whole generational aspect. There's this great story that Lynn Twist, who's an American author, she told me when she was having dinner with Buckminster Fuller. And so I think she at one point talked about it, but I don't think she's even written about the story, about how basically she was with her husband and their two kids who were quite young. They were young teenagers at the time. And one of them just said something which like everyone around the table stopped and said, "That's super wise. How did this kid come up with something so wise?" And Buckminster Fuller looked at them because he was there at dinner that night, and he says, "Well, you do realize that our children are our elders in universe time, right?" It's like, most of us think as kids as being kind of like a subset of us because we're adults and we're older, as opposed to, like a mobile phone. Like if it's a younger phone, it means it's a more advanced version of it. And so we do have this aspect of kids themselves teaching themselves differently. And so the question is, how much does that need to be formalized, given that they're already figuring things out? Like most of the cryptocurrencies in the world are actually developed by kids, right? So what is it that we can be doing to support and formalize that? There's one part in your manifesto, you talk about Coach K, the idea that maybe the student, one of the goals of the student is to be the coach, right? To actually already be learning how to teach as they go through that. Can you talk a bit to that process of how everyone who's an educator on this core can be helping their students to actually become teachers in their own right as well?
I'd be delighted. I met Lynn years ago. I love that there's a Buckminster connection as well. So the specific part of the rant is why do we have football coaches and these huge teams, 6, 7, 8 people coaching the football team? Why aren't the kids coaching the football team? Because in fact, the kids are much more likely to grow up to be football coaches than they are to grow up to be football players. Why is the musical, like I produced a 5th grade musical at the local public school, and there was not one adult backstage at any performance? Why not? Right? If the kid can be trusted to be on stage, why can't a kid be trusted to be the stage manager and be trusted? That we learn by doing. And so part of the goal of the pedagogical focused teacher, or my cousin at her high school, is how do I create a culture where new ideas from younger models are likely to be productively embraced? And part of what capitalism has gotten in the way of, industrial capitalism, is if that's the only thing we're keeping score of, if we say to someone, don't go to jail and make as much money as possible, you win, well, that's the game people are going to play. And it's up to us as institution builders to decide what game we want people to play and to build a system where that's the game they're likely to choose.
Yeah. This has been so fascinating, Seth. I know we're going to be coming up to time fairly soon, and I do want us to finish on some very specific guidance in whatever version you want to have it for those who have chosen a profession to be an educator, to be a teacher at the end, as to what you would like set them on to be just focusing at or be aware of going forward. But before we do that, I do have one final question, which is something we've realized, especially with entrepreneurs who have an open roadmap. So it's like, well, which way do they go? How do they go? It's more important not to give them a map, but give them a compass of some sort. And one thing that we've realized over time is one of the biggest challenges often with those who are starting their first business, or frankly, you don't even have a business, like someone in the gig economy who's got a second job or so on, is this whole concept of vision. That when we go to school, there's a whole part of our frontal cortex, which is where we have imagination, which we have had to kind of just dedicate to memory, right? Like going to memorize, and then we test our memory, and then after we tested it, then we don't know what to do with that part of our brain anymore. And that part, which creates vision, which is basically remembering the future, is the same part which is the past. And if you look at the most successful leaders and entrepreneurs and you ask them how it's going, they hardly ever tell you what happened yesterday. They're telling you about where they're going, what's going to happen tomorrow, or what they hope happens tomorrow. And we've found that skill set of reshifting your brain to be able to say, well, here's what my future self could look like, or here's my future business, could look like or what future word I'd want to look like, that can make a massive shift. But it comes with a necessary belief that you can even create visionary people out of someone who might not think they're visionary. What's your view on that? Do you see, vision itself as being something that you're born with, or could that be part of the whole education process as well?
Yeah, this is a great place to riff. I have never met someone who accidentally bought a hammer, right? You buy a hammer because you need to hammer a nail. That's the only reason. What's it for? 3 simple words. If you're an entrepreneur, you should be really clear about what's it for. And don't tell me it's to make as much money as possible, because you probably picked the wrong project, right? That there are better ways to make money than that thing you think you're doing right now. What's it for? What change are you seeking to make? As Michael Schrage said, are you trying to change your customers? Are you trying to change your life? Are you trying to change where you're, right? Who are you trying to change? What are you trying to change? What's it for? So if you're a teacher, what I want to know is the next hour you're going to spend in class, what's it for? If you're a school board, I want you to tell me before you spend another $1 million a week, what's that money for? If you're a parent, please tell me why you sent your kid to school. What's it for? Is it for the sticker? Do you really want to spend 12 years of their life and your life with all this stress and tension so you can get a better sticker? Is that what it's for? And very few people have the guts to ask what's it for. And fewer still have the guts to answer it. Because most of my peers here in the suburbs, if they were being honest, what school is for? Get the kids out of my hair, keep them out of trouble, get me a sticker on my car. That's what it's for. And they can't even say that because it's so filled with shame. Understandably, school should be for something else. Being an entrepreneur should be for something else. If you really, if you're trading Bitcoin, it should only be for one thing, to make a profit. If you trade Bitcoin and you lose money, you've wasted your time and your money. But for the rest of us, the rest of the time, the what's it for needs to be really clear.
So with educators who are there going through the massive amount of noise out there in the markets and where they focus, what they do, the whole purpose side is obviously hugely important. Creating the right dynamics, using what's out there at the moment to actually really enable the fact that everyone's looking for a new solution, to be able to provide a solution. These are all the key things for sure coming out of this conversation. What else would you add? What would you add that we haven't said or haven't shared that we should be thinking about as educators?
Well, if you're a public school teacher, thank you. It's a special case because for everybody else, enrollment is optional. For everybody else, whatever you're doing is not for everyone. And getting really clear about the fact that it's not for everyone frees you up. The smallest viable audience. Who's on the bus? And this is, I think, the only reason why a gifted class does better than a regular class, I'm using gifted in quotes, than a regular class in public school. Not because the kids are any different, just because the enrollment is there. They chose to be in that class. And this idea that what I'm teaching is not for everybody, that even if I became the most successful teacher in the history of the world, I would still only reach a tiny fraction of the people on earth. Great, fine. Who wants in? Who's coming with me? You got to begin with that. If a parent is telling you their kid is not going to amount to anything, if you don't get that parent on board, there's nothing you can do with that kid. This is enrollment. That's our job. The teaching will take care of itself.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Seth, for your time and for the manifesto as well. It's just amazing how much the things you talked about are the things that so many people are now striving around the world to actually create. And frankly, it's impossible for a parent or student not to read that and not to say that's just total common sense we should be doing. And look forward to seeing in a decade from now how much things have evolved from here. So big thanks for your time. And everyone, please do have a look at both the video and the manifesto as well from Seth Godin. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Roger. Really appreciate your time.